What's up, Purist? Today I've got a special treat for you. I'm going to sit down with Stu Acres of the Saleen Ranch. And Stu owns a lot of Saleens, but specifically this car, which is the second Saleen ever built. We're going to discuss why it is numbered the way it is, because the bumper number doesn't necessarily signify that it is the second one built. And this car being the second one built, it was owned by a child actor, and it was the very first Saleen ever sold to the public. It has a lot of cool history to it, and at one point people thought it had been burned to the point where it was put in a junkyard or recycled. It was a very unique story on how Stu came about owning this car. He also owns the very first Saleen produced.
Introduction to this is that you're now caretaker of all three 84 Saleen Mustangs. And at one point, you're like the rest of the world watching. You were not aware that we're just three. And there's a lead into you gathering the copper car, which is the one we're really focused on talking about. So how did you go about coming into, the first one I think is 8432? That's correct?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So how did you find that one, and then your interest grow in the other cars?
Okay, I had a couple 68 and a half 428 Cobra Jet fastbacks that I had sold. I had a 70 Q code Cobra Jet non-shaker hood car that I had sold. I had some money and I thought I want to own a Saleen. And down in Virginia, there was a red 85 number 130 that I almost bought. That would have been my very first Saleen, but I did not buy it. And I went to the local cruise-in that Jason Smith goes to, and they're set 8701. It had federal test vehicle decals all over the door. And I'm a real, guru on rarity. And I saw that and I knew something had to be really rare about that car. So that's how I got in contact with Ken Schmidt from Blue Diamond Classics. So he started telling me how he had an 84 Saleen and this, that, and the other. So I wasn't really too fascinated. I was more fascinated over the 87. And he was going to the Auburn auction at that time. And he already had the cars paid for and going to the auction. So I went to his place and I seen him. He says, I couldn't buy any cars until after the auction. If nothing's sold, then I'll sell you something. I really wanted the 87. Well, the silly 84 stayed back and nobody bought it. So I said, oh, well, I'll buy that car. And that's where the beginning started. Right. But then I got a hold of Team Saleen, which Liz worked there, which was, I started talking to her, and she never said that there was three. That was all top secret because they were SCCA racing. And so they wanted, 50, 32, 51, and 52. We got 50 cars. That was part of the rules. So they didn't want to release the information for 10 years past 84.
Okay.
So once they got past the 10-year mark, then they released that there's only three. And I had read in the magazine after that, because now I got this 84, that they built 50 cars in 84.
Huh.
That's what they wanted everybody to believe.
Right. Right. Which is the play on numbers, because the little short video that I put out with from us being down in Birmingham, that's the first thing people were asking. It's like, okay, it's numbered 51. Why is it the second one built?
The word is called homologation.
Right.
Most people don't understand what homologation is. And when SCCA comes out, that's why you go back to 65 Shelby's. When Shelby had 100 cars sitting out there in the lot and had to have SCCA come over and look at those 100 Shelby's to prove it went from a tuner to a manufacturer. And that's what Steve had to do, but they changed the rules from 100 to 50.
Okay.
Steve had to prove that they had 50 cars built. So he built the 32 and we got 50 cars.
Yeah. So just for those that are watching, 32 is the very first Saleen built. That's the bumper number. And then the second Saleen built's 51, and that's the bumper number. And then the third Saleen built is 52. So those are the chassis numbers that were assigned by Saleen. So so now you have this 32, we'll call it. You have that car, and then you're building information, right? You're trying to figure out what it is. And, like you said, you really had your eye on that emissions car, knowing that because it had a story that it would be a valuable piece down the road. Not knowing at that time you'd likely bought the more valuable piece of Saleen history, right?
Yeah, I was actually depressed bringing the 84 home. And I had an 84 GT 350 T-top car. And my buddy says, I'd rather have the T-top car than that thing that I just brought home.
Man, I bet there's a lot of people in your life that are that way with those cars.
In fact, Ken Schmidt was actually selling 8432 to someone else, and they couldn't get their loan to go through to buy the car. And they had a 90 Mustang coupe, not a Saleen, and they were going to sell the coupe so they could start driving that 8432 as a daily driver.
And that's, this is circa what, 92, 93. Car wasn't 10 years old yet, right?
Right.
Okay. So you got this car. When did you figure out that there was the second car built? Like when did you figure out that the copper car was built or available? How did that come about?
Well, the copper car, I learned at this point finally that, a year or so later, that there's only 3. Anyway, so I had to learn VIN numbers.
And that's before internet. Like now you can go online.
Oh yeah. I had phone bills that were $500 a month. There was no, oh yeah.
So, yeah. I mean, that's today you can just key and figure out how to do calculations on that and stuff. Back then that wasn't available.
So I had to go to Ford, and I knew the guys over at the local Ford dealership. So they had the Oasis report. That's the extended warranty stuff. And back then I brought them a case of beer, and I wrote down all the numbers that it could have been on certain cars, and they would just punch it into the Oasis until they hit my number. And that's how I got the complete VIN number.
So is that the process you took in finding the VIN number for the 8451 car?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. What was your next step? Like what? Because you didn't have.
Next step was this was all new to me. So it's like, what is my next step?
Right.
What do I do? How do I find this car? I've got a VIN. Now what? Is it alive? I had rumored that it burned in a fire. So was it in the junkyard crushed? Was it in someone's garage? I had no clue.
Right.
So I took the VIN number and took a wild chance. And this is before 9/11. I said, the car's probably in California. So I called Sacramento, the capital, and I talked to DMV, and I thought I was in trouble because as soon as the lady answered the phone, and I told her, this is Stu, and I'm representing the Saleen Mustang Club, and we're looking for a Saleen that we don't have any photographs of. And she didn't want to hear all that. All she said is, what's your VIN number? So I rattled off the VIN number. I heard her typing, and she punches in. She goes, oh, I found this right here. Like, oh my goodness, she found it. It's like, okay. And she goes, I can't give you any information. So then my heart drops. She goes, but I've got this piece of paper that I can send to you, and you send back a self-addressed envelope and $7, and you fill the bottom of it out with whatever you want to put on there. And when it gets here, we cut the bottom off and we send it to the owner of the car. And if they don't contest it within 10 days, they will send me the computer printout on the car. Well, before all that happened, the owner of the car called me and said they had no interest in the car and they want to sell it.
Wow. So that's like perfect timing, right? Like you can't predict.
This is 93,
Okay.
the middle of 93. I got the car home towards the end of 93. And I was working on the car and getting the new harness put in it in January, because I remember it was really cold out when I was doing all this.
And so the rumor was that you had heard that it had burned was true, right?
Right. But I didn't know how or why.
Right. Okay.
I do now, but I didn't at the time. I just knew it was on fire, but I didn't know why.
Let's see here. With that, then, so once you had the car, there had to be a thought process of, I need parts and I want to fix it right. Knowing you and then the rest of the world's getting to know you, it's like your patience to find the right stuff. And of course, to that too, it's a benefit. And now that I think about it, because we've talked about it, but the benefit of you getting it in like 93, 94 is that Ford would still have parts for that car, right? So
my goal is to get the sheet metal, get it straightened out. I bought new factory Ford fenders for it, a brand new factory Ford hood for it, a new bumper cover for it, and all the fiberglass header, every headlight bucket, nut, bolt, screw, spring, bucket, everything. And it had already been wrecked before. So that's a GT. So the fog light bar underneath there was missing. They had an LX bumper cover on it.
Okay.
So I bought the fog light bar, all brand new fog lights for it to put it back together. So I went and restored the car back to a driving condition and drove approximately about 100 miles on it to my buddy's houses. And then it went to the garage, and I went to I made a list. I bought every brand new part, every sensor, everything under the hood was smoke from the fire. All that was new old stock radiator, and the engine really wasn't hurt. I pulled it out, resealed it, kind of rebuilt it, put it back in, took the K member off of it because it had melted stuff that went down and hit the K member. So the K member all came out, put it all back together. And then everybody says, "You're going to go get it painted?" I said, "No, it'll get painted in 20 years from now." And that's why it just now got unveiled, and everybody thought it burned up too bad, just unrestorable. No, I just saved it because I didn't have a lot of money back then. I was after more cars. I don't need to pay money on a paint job. I want another car.
Right. I can relate to that. I've got more projects than I can count, but it's fun. The process is fun.
You'll never get them done.
No.
Just keep adding another one to it on top of the one.
Here we are again, going back to Saleens Anonymous, telling me I got a problem. But so I guess even then when you're going, because the emission stuff and all the things on the car, so you're likely, and as money allows, just buying a piece of here and there, right? Did you do that, or did you go, like you said, you got all the front hardware?
It took me 6 months to put the pieces together, but what's unique is you don't realize the emissions under the hood on that car is much rarer than the other. They called it back then. I don't know what they call it today. They had the 49 states. So California had all the emissions under the hood totally different than all the other cars.
That's right. I didn't think about that. So the thing is, let's talk about 8451's unique characteristics, because that to me is something that it's different than the other two in many ways. It's the only, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's the only of the three built on a GT chassis, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. With that in of itself, there are interior upgrades that Ford did. There are certain things and aspects of the car itself, even before Saleen touched it, that made it different than an LX or GLX model, right?
Right. There's another thing I think too, the reason why Steve got that car to do it is that color was not a popular color. Ford deleted it after that. So that was I call that a lot lizard. There's a car sitting on the lot that nobody wants.
Right.
So they said, take that car over there and go turn it into Saleen. Maybe we can sell it now.
That's a possibility there. That's very likely. Yeah. It's kind of Calypso's kind of the same thing. People.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody wanted it, but they want it now.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So I just with it being the copper color, I mean, I think there's only I'm gonna state this, but I'm going by memory. 180 produced, I think,
Yeah, there's not many. Not
in
many at
color
all.
by Ford. Yeah. And then so it's a 5-liter GT 5-speed car. Copper with tan interior. But the Saleen add-ons, like this is for first year. This is not regular production. This car is unique. It's hand built. So
Right. This car, if you really look at it, it's a second Saleen built, but it's the first one sold to the public.
right. Right. And so, but there are unique designs to it. I think we were discussing, decals are different, right?
They're all hand laid, one letter at a time.
Okay. And that and we're talking about the words on it. It's like it says racecraft suspension, right? There's actually an S, right?
I talked to Steve about that, and he said that they had a misinterpretation with words. So the first few cars that they done, when they came out to do them, Steve wasn't there, and they put the word suspensions on a few of the beginning cars, and Steve told them to quit doing that.
Right. And then also the decals under the door are not decals on the S84. They're painted, right?
Right. The 80, we know for sure the 8432 and 8451 were painted. How do we know that? Well, I have the 84 that still has all the original skirting under the doors on it. It's cracked, but it's all original. And then the front air dam was gone off the copper car when I got it. The skirts were gone off the copper car when I got it, but the rear spats were still there and they were painted.
Okay. All right. And then there are upgrades that Saleen did. What were the upgrades in 84? I mean, what did they do to the car?
In 84, I think, if I'm not mistaken, the sway bar links were rubber. I think 85 was the first year they went to urethane.
Okay.
And they're an off green color. So in 84, they put the urethane links on the 84s. And in 85, they didn't have to do that anymore because they were already there, done by Ford.
Okay.
And then in the Petaluma cars, the G-load brace under the engine, I hate to say it, it's crude. Take a round pipe, measure how far you want it to be, smash the ends and drill 2 holes in it, paint it red, and bolt it on.
Okay.
And then later on, they went to the square tubing and cut them off on 45-degree angles and made it look much nicer. But in the early cars, they were done up like that.
So, okay. So he did that. So you got the G-load brace, which is basically a modified piece of tubing. Sway bar end links.
The copper car did get its Bilstein shocks, and they did not they left the original quad shocks in the rear alone. They didn't touch those. Okay. So the shocks got Bilstein.
Well, you said quad shocks. So 84 is a mid-year run where the quad shocks were introduced.
Correct.
On that. So not all 84s have quad shocks.
Early ones didn't. They did. The GT didn't have fog lights early.
Right. They changed the air dam. They put the fog lamps into it, and then the slapper bars were earlier than the quad shocks. They would hit the control arm to keep the rear end.
That was like 82, wasn't it?
Yeah, 82, 83, and I think part of 84. That was the deal, so that it keeps the wheel hop to a minimum. But so this car having quad shocks is pretty cool. And fog lamps too. But the other things that Saleen added, there was an alarm that was unique at the time too, right?
2 different alarms. The sales brochure is very rare. The original alarm was called the ultrasonic alarm. Okay. It was different than the later. So most 85s, you'll see that little box that sits beside the shifter that's got those 3 little lights on it.
Right.
That was the later alarm. The early alarm had a different horn that hung under the front where that black box does on the later ones. That's how it came, and it was ultrasonic. It had a little box that sit underneath the dash or wherever you wanted to install it. So if there was any movement in the car, then the alarm would go off. So if you open the door, it wouldn't go off. But the minute that little box seen movement in the car, then the alarm would go off. That's the ultrasonic alarm, and that's the alarm that's listed on the sales brochure.
You know, it's crazy too that that car still has those sensors. You know, all of that stuff was in there, and of course the horn. Now, did I would assume
Now the horn to another alarm system that I had to steal the horn from because it was burned up.
that's what I thought. Okay, I was going to ask you. You just beat me to the question. Well, so 8451 is a big wing car, and you know that's kind of the designation of that. And you had this neat little thing because a lot of people get their 85s, and the wings do look big, but when you put it next to a real big wing car, it's like, whoa, okay. What's the trick you would get? I like
Well, so if you go get a small wing on a car, the air gap from the hatch to the wing is very short.
Yeah.
So if you try to stand behind that car and stick your hand all the way through that wing, can you get your hand all the way through that wing and touch your nose?
the thing about it, not only is 8451 unique because it's one of 3 Saleens built, but it alone, you know, being the copper, tan interior, GT, non-sunroof. I mean, that alone would be a rare Mustang in just today's regular pool of Mustangs.
Yeah, and even the collar on top of that.
Well, I mean, it's one of those, like, I don't think that the pictures, like, you have to see it in person. It's just,
I had to get my insurance agent. I made him come by here and look at the car. I sent him pictures. I said, you don't understand. You need to come by here. Well, I seen the pictures. No. And then when he came here, he understood why I had him come by.
because it really,
I went and took pictures of 83 and 84 Mustangs 25 years ago that had low miles on it. So I could get all of the paint marks and everything that was the way it was supposed to be, because under the hood, all that was burned off and gone. So I had to make all the rubber stamps and get all that stuff set up so that when I restored the car, I had photographs of originals so I could make it look just like it was.
and so when we're talking with the restoration you did on this, like it's back to as delivered, like it's not over restored, you know, which is easy to do. Like that's something to make something look nicer than it was because it's pleasing to the eye. The difficult part is to not do that, is to go back to having things have overspray.
Sometimes you can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's impossible.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people want to do, like when I was doing this SC, a lot of people don't understand how the cars came down the assembly line. They were actually on a sled.
Yeah.
When they came down the assembly line, they're on the sled and they got curves on the ends. And they're on a sled with 6 pins. And they've got round washers on. And they leave those round washer marks on the bottom of the frame rails. So anyway, as it comes down, that's the sled that car is being built on. And when they paint the car, there should be overspray on the bottom of the floor pans.
Well, and then under the washer, you'll have etch coating, but no paint.
Sometimes as the car got heavier and heavier and heavier as the car is being built, it was pushing down on that. I don't know if they had pads on them or what they did, but they left black marks on them.
Yeah.
I've got a tool that I made that has foam on it, and I spray flat black on it, and I recreate those round circles I call them prop circles.
I mean, that's the kind of detail this car got is you put into making it look back as delivered. And that's the best way to describe it. Like it's what Ford would have put on the showroom floor as it came off the truck. There may have been a little dealer prep, which is typical to, you know, if it went on a train or if it was on a truck and it went through some weather, they're going to wash it, make it look nice to put it on a showroom floor or on the lot. So other than that dealer prep, you know, the cars don't get touched, and the valve covers have, you know, the flashing look to aluminum, right? They're not even and smooth.
Everybody thinks they got to polish everything.
Yeah.
And that's the worst thing you can do.
Well, then you're in my opinion, you're the perfect personality to own these cars so that they don't get put back to more than better than new. Because like people will take it 2 or 3 steps beyond. Like this is the way the car presented as if it was sitting in a showroom. And
Right.
that's
It's good. Right. Correct. I agree. It's like the paint. The paint back then, the process of painting them was totally different than the process of painting them today.
Yep.
You didn't have all that clear coat, and if you did, it was really thin from Ford. They had a lot of orange peel in the paint, and it's very difficult to reproduce a paint job on any one of these cars to make it look like they did back then.
Mm-hmm.
Mainly it's clear coat, so this is copper, so it had a clear coat on it when it was new.
Mm-hmm.
So the car is a little more shinier probably than when it was new.
Well, but I think that's to be expected. I mean, there's certain,
And I didn't want that.
well, and there's only so much you can do. I will say this: the paint presents as a factory paint to me. There is still a little orange peel in it. You've got the overspray, right? Like we talked about. So to me, it's as close as you're going to get now. And I mean, and there's some of that too, like even with the 87 to 89 cars and the seat material, there's a certain thing that becomes acceptable. Like this is the best you're going to get compared to what was done 40 years ago. So there are, I guess, there's forgiveness there in some of those places, but for the most part, I mean, the engine bay, it looks like a stock Ford engine bay.
I've restored probably over 100 cars for a guy named Bill Lindsay in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, where I met Patty. And that's who I worked for him for 18 years. And that's where I got my experience on restoring cars. Wow.
And that, it pays off dividends when you're working with cars that are now in value. I mean, you can't put a value on the 384s. It's very, very difficult.
You were talking about when I got it.
Yeah.
Chris Fields was very rough on the car. He told me when I got it, I called and talked to him on the phone. And I said, "What happened to the rear end?" "What do you mean?" I said, "Something happened to the rear end." "How do you know?" So because it has red silicone coming out around the cover where somebody's had that rear cover off. "So why did you have?" He goes, "Oh man, I can't believe you know that." He goes, "I used to go up on the canyon roads in California with all my buddies, and we would do burnouts in parking lots. We got in big trouble for doing that. And we would measure the donuts we could put in a parking lot and who could make the smallest donut." He goes, "I would win all the time, and I snapped an axle up there."
Nice.
So that's what happened to that rear end on that car.
Well, there was something too. The exhaust, it's got the original exhaust tips on it, right?
Yes.
And
still has the whole complete exhaust on it, the original.
Wow, that's so cool. And San Francisco people, if you've ever been to San Francisco, just watch Bullet. That's probably one of the best examples of it. When you're coming down a hill, the street, you come and you flatten out and then you go down again.
Especially if you're going fast.
Exactly. And I mean, let's be honest, 16-year-old kid, 17, even if he was driving, it was 17 years old. So the bottom of the exhaust tips are scraped like aggressively. And so they had that just shows you that he was having a lot of fun with that car. if you ask me. Because it's scratched on the bottom, and the transition from going downhills to a street and then going downhill again, I mean, you'll catch air going off of that. So I'm sure he destroyed the fiberglass air dam a few times. I'm sure because they hang so low, and in that area it wouldn't be hard to do. I guess the crutch of it is that car, you saw how unique the car was 30 plus years ago, to the point of figuring out the VIN number, figuring out where it is, chasing it down. And just truthfully, all 3 cars are sense of luck. Because when the owner called you on this car, even though you did due diligence to find where it was, the owner called you and said, "I don't want it. I'm ready to sell it." And so you entered that conversation at the right time. It's just like fate on all 3 of them coming to you.
You got to remember, It's unlike today. You have the internet, you
Right.
have you have people that are in the Saleen world.
I'm thankful for you letting me and us talk about this, because it's just a cool piece of Saleen history that's not been shared before. Because I mean, you took your time in getting it right, you know.
I learned a lot too. Just back to those decals, they were all hand cut, like race suspension. They were on a big clear Mylar sheet, and they cut them out weirdly and put them on one at a time.
But anyways, the uniqueness of the 84s are just, it's untouchable. It has a cool story. I mean, it's unique and of its own. And I just want to thank you for giving me your time to be able to talk about them and talk about this car, because it's really cool to see it complete. I've known about it since I met you over 10 years ago. We talked about it, and I'm just thankful that you're allowing me to share your story.
I had the big plan of when I was going to do it, and I'm about 5 years behind on my plan.
Well, shame on you for going 5 years late, Stu.
Right.
No, you're good, man.
So everybody just thought it was never going to get done or whatever. And I had it in my plans. It just run a little behind.
Really hope you enjoyed that. It's a unique story about those cars, having all three Saleens in under one roof, so to speak, that were produced in '84. I thought it was interesting that Stu talked about, you know, it really wasn't necessarily something he wanted to do in the beginning. He didn't know what he had bought at the beginning. So don't forget to subscribe. Please hit the thumbs up if you like the video, and that helps me big time to be able to continue to do this for you. And stay tuned for more. As always, whether you're driving them or restoring them, always enjoy them. Peace.